Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever it is, wherever you are, welcome to the Good Values podcast. This episode is going to be the last one of the first season of the Good Values podcast, and I've saved a special episode for the last one. This is going to be part 2 of my conversation with David Woodfall, but if you haven't seen part 1, don't worry, you don't need to see part 1 to understand part 2. It's not like a series or the second half of a film, but I will encourage you to see part 1 if you want to. I'll put a link. I'm really looking forward to showing you this episode. It was all recorded in one session, but because it was quite long, it was way over an hour, we split it into 2, and then we start off with some international discussion. So without further ado, here is the second part of my conversation with David Woodfall.
We've got one of my photographs that has been remembered, I guess, of a car dump in the USA, and I can talk about that briefly to show how I work.
Please, the audience will be wondering what we're looking at behind us.
Yeah, well, I lived in North America, in Montana for a summer. I've been there quite a few times already. I've done about 12 trips throughout the USA, road trips.
Yeah.
I was very inspired by John Steinbeck, whose book Grapes of Wrath changed my life and my politics when I was 14.
Yeah.
So I lived in this little town 50 miles north of Yellowstone called Livingston. And every time I went to the next town, Bozeman, on my right side from the freeway, I noticed 5 cars peeking over the bluff with headlights showing. And it really intrigued me. So I went to Bozeman a lot because there was a great jazz and blues and folk music archive there, bookshop, Fargo's, and great postcards, books. And one time coming back, I'd always come on the main drag onto the interstate. And I went on the other one, random choice again. And that's why random is really important. Because you keep doing the same thing, you'll get the same answer.
Yeah.
So I came off, and there was a gas station on the edge of the prairie. And there was 50 cars strung about behind the gas station. And then the hairs on the back of my neck kept coming up. And I thought, wait a minute, there's a mile between those cars and those 5 cars. So I went down a little track in my car. Now, it's a really important thing to adhere to when you're in America. When you're on someone else's land, you never, ever take your camera out because you'll be shot. So it's an important rule. So I came to a bluff, stopped the car, walked up onto the bluff, and that's exactly what I saw. In fact, it wasn't exactly what I saw. There was a 50-acre car lot hidden in the folds of the prairie. As I noticed this, I could see there was a wrecking shed with a guy and a German Shepherd watching. This guy and the German Shepherd seems to follow me around throughout my life.
It does, it's a consistent motif.
Yeah. So I walked straight up to him. Now, in America, everyone lies. No one, particularly in business. So people don't go on what you say, they go on body language, because it doesn't lie. So I walked straight up to him. I said, "Hi, I'm David. I'm an environmental photographer. I live on 8th Street." And I named the woman I was living with and where she worked. So he knew I was part of things.
Yeah.
And I said, how would you feel about me taking their photograph? And I used the word take because with people like that, if you use make, they're kind of unclear what it wouldn't be part of their own vocabulary. He said, yeah, maybe. So he said, what do you want to do with the picture? Brackets. So I lied. So I said, I don't know. It's incongruous, really, isn't it? That's a really good word, David. Which told me he didn't know what it meant. So he said, when do you want to take the picture? So I said, it's really nice now, isn't it? I'm busy now. Okay. So I said, is that your bungalow I've driven past? Yes. So I said, if I come one evening and you're not there, could I take some pictures then? You'll be sure. Okay. So I went back 2.5 months later, and Mike Adams said, where you been, David? He was concerned at the speed I wanted it for, because that told him if I wanted it quickly, I might be a threat to him. And those people are always really sharp. And now, people might think it's been compositionally altered. It hasn't. I used a 6x17 panoramic camera. You get 4 photographs to a row, so you have to be careful. That was 10 quid in those times.
6x17 is an incredible aspect ratio, isn't it?
Very incredible, because it means you can communicate something on one side of the image and the relationship the other, in a way a square or a standard rectangle that you can't. So it changed everything. Yeah. And I could document relationships far better than I had previously, and it totally liberated me. And me being me, you know, I don't know how many rolls of film I used when I went back, perhaps 25. So that I made 100 photographs. And I walked amongst them and got close-ups. It was stupendous. That was really powerful. And what was even more powerful was a year later, and this is a message for the viewer and the aspiring photographer that's starting out. So I took my daughter back. Now, she'd seen the photographs, but when she saw the extent of it, it blew her mind, because nothing had prepared for that. Because she thought she knew what she was going to see, but she didn't. And Tessney's a really smart person, very, very bright. And she was 10 or 11 at the time, and said, how did you know it was there, Dad? You can't see it from anywhere. So I just looked her in the eye and said, that's what Dad does. He goes down tracks with no prospect of anything. Yeah. And that's what you've got to do as a photographer. You're curious. That's the most important driving force. Forget about how angry you might be about some of the things you see. This was really positive, and it was hidden, so it wasn't a problem. Montana likes his clean reputation. So shortly after, I got a phone call from the Department of the Interior. It was used by the Sierra Club in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
And they didn't like what they saw.
Oh, didn't they?
I started getting requests for prints from little villages, which I didn't respond to because it was suspicious, near to this place. So I didn't respond. And then I got the phone call from the Department of Interior in America, saying that basically I gave the impression Montana was a dump. Well, all I did was photograph what's there. The guy had a license to do it. He wouldn't have let me photograph it. He didn't have a license. He knew exactly where this place was. He just wanted to trap me. Yeah. So I didn't. He said, well, perhaps you don't want to come back to America. And to be perfectly honest, at the time, I didn't. So I didn't respond. Yeah. And so he had nothing on me. So, and subsequently then, how that leads into a campaign. Mark Edwards, the environmentalist, had an amazing agency called Still Pictures. I had a little bit of work with him. And they chose Mark develop a project called the Hard Rain Project, which was using one photograph for every line of Bob Dylan's song Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. And I had a photograph in that. And at the time, it had been seen by 18 million people. Because Mark developed the idea from a concept by Jan Arthurs Bertrand, the aerial photographer, who put exhibitions in outdoor places in cities. Wow. So there was no barrier for people to go into the hallowed ground of an exhibition centre. And so, and it was a really tough exhibition. It was desperate. I mean, I think my photograph of an aerial of a cloudburst and a rainbow in a rainforest in Venezuela was one of the few positive pictures. I think there was one other. But it's a desperately difficult song.
Yeah.
And so then subsequently Mark developed the exhibition in a whole earth, hence the title on the image, and chose this. So it's weird how then a photograph that started its life as almost a happy accident, but it's important to say that was my intuition, and that's what created it, to something that's used all over the world. And that's why I like working with people like Mark Edwards, because they're equally passionate to myself. But that's just how I work. It's often most people would have given up before I even get the camera out of the car or go on a walk. My approach is very, very different. So I work with Kenny Taylor. We've both been conservationists. In fact, Kenny Taylor still was a conservationist. And we decided, we met at a conservation officer conference in 1987 in Shropshire. And we both had exactly the same idea for a book about the relationship between people and the landscape. And it came to be known as Natural Heartlands. Now, I didn't finish that book until 96. So that was 15 years in the making.
Wow.
And again, I could fit in with my work. I knew what I wanted to do. Kenny, we'd talk about it. And I think we probably turned down more times than the Beatles, because it wasn't a book, issues in the landscape wasn't what people wanted to look at. They wanted to look at pretty pictures, which to me is an anathema. Didn't mean anything. No. It's just a pretty place.
Yeah.
Photography to me is about relationships.
Yeah.
So we develop ideas, concepts. I'd go all over Britain and Ireland. I kind of felt I'd been everywhere in Britain and Ireland for 5 minutes at that stage in my life. I was working much of the time. This is I remember working in Ireland in 1987. I just spent 2 weeks photographing peatbogs. So eventually the book came out in 1997. I found a small publisher called Airlife in Shrewsbury that specialised in aeroplanes, country life, and field sports. So we kind of fell into the country life category, even though the book contained images and issues happening in towns as well, because it was the whole of Britain and Ireland. We certainly didn't want a beautiful Britain book. We wanted something that had a cutting edge, really. Because that's how we, as conservationists, we didn't have any illusions about how things looked. We looked at the world as the wildlife looks at the world. How functional is this landscape for us? So it came out, and it was really exciting. I was really fortunate. My mother was able to see the book just before she passed away, so that meant a lot. And then we had a lucky break. It came, well, don't really know. It didn't win the 1998 Natural History Book of the Year, but it came very, very close. And it was highly commended. People privately told me it was runner-up. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But David Attenborough's Life of Birds was the winner, and a worthy winner. And just to be part of that was something else. Really exciting, like in my photograph of Wasserwater when we had a party the night before with all the winning photographers, Helen Jokes set up this wonderful idea, and the people from Alaska brought salmon. And I met authors from all over the world, and photographers who've done their own books. Yeah. So you're on a similar path. So just being part of it was incredible. Yeah. And he had a lot of kind of critical acclaim. It didn't sell a huge amount, but that wasn't the purpose. It was a message from our hearts, really. And we felt we created something authentic and something very people-centered, because we both felt that conservation wasn't about people enough. And that's what the purpose of the book was. And we'd made contact with astonishing people, peat cutters, farmers, so many different farmers. And I'd learned a huge amount just by being with them. And one of the difficulties with environmental issues, particularly in highly developed countries, people take very polarized views. Environmental issues are far more complex than we realize. If they were easy, we'd have sorted them out. But let's just remind ourselves we are facing existential crisis.
I've heard that a lot of journalists struggle to publish environmental exposés because of the blocks from the BBC or Channel 4 or any kind of outlets are not so amenable to those types of stories, and they only want it within certain parameters and not anything which is a broader scope to show the actual fragility that we're facing.
Yeah, the powers that be are the forces that be. They control everything. So, and particularly when I lived in America and I did the rounds going to see publishers, that was very obvious.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I took my hat off to people who had inspired me, people like Neil Young and Bob Dylan and John Lee Hooker, and how they managed to overcome the prejudice from music that wasn't straightforward and da-dee-dee-dee to something that was fundamental about our existential crisis in the early 60s, and in John Lee Hooker's case since 1948. So, that's central to everything.
So, how is it you choose the subject matter for your images?
Going back to, because I knew I wanted to be a photographer about 1982, really. And one of the techniques I used, and the subject matter I chose, was to concentrate on landscapes, but to do them in a way that they were attractive, simple, but they contained a deep message. So it's like I wasn't ramming it in anyone's faces. This also had the additional plus of actually being suitable material for calendars sometimes. So you learn all those things by engaging. Yeah. You're learning the whole time. Yeah. And never have a fixed idea about anything. So I chose habitats of Britain and Ireland. That was one of my first strands. And so I'd go out and I'd pre-visualised, I knew somewhere, and I'd pre-visualised the photographs I want. So I'd go maybe, like with the pollution, 50 times. And I'd go different times of the day, never have a preconception that maybe the first light and last light was the best time, which it generally is. But sometimes the middle of the day, you get extraordinary light. So I had an open mind. It made for a fairly obsessional person, me. And so I created, that was one of my canvases. And it kind of related very much to that first book. But it also related very much to the second book, which came out in 2002, which I worked with another photographer, Bob Gibbons. And we did a book called Flowers at My Feet, which is the title's taken from a John Keats poem. And we looked at the habitats and wildflowers of Britain and Ireland. And that was published by my now publishers, HarperCollins. And again, we were highly commended in the Natural History Book of the Year. So this time I got to meet E.O. Wilson, who is the doyen of ecologists. And that was a huge thrill. And I remember meeting him in London. He gave an amazing talk, and I introduced myself and I said, congratulations on winning the thing, but I'm so disappointed. And I then told him how I'd won an award in the States that year. And he said, okay, David, so you win over there, I win over here. And it was great. It just made me laugh. It took away my disappointment. But that's genius for you. And that guy had it in spades. I mean, just extraordinary ecologist. And you learn from those people. And so that book, I had a technique of using wide-angle lenses, something I developed from an extraordinary photographer, Tony Evans, who had done The Flower in the Britain with Richard Mabey in the late 70s, early 80s. And Tony Evans was one of the true greats. And so you're learning all the time. You're open to techniques, seeing does it work for you? What does it mean? So we did that, but very much in the spirit of Tony Evans' work. And it's important to acknowledge it. And we went all over Britain and Ireland. I mean, that was an extraordinary journey. At that time, it was really fortunate for us. Photographers were properly rewarded. That's not something that now happens. That's changed, and that's a really important message that relates to people who want to become photographers.
It leads into my next question, actually, which have you given any thought to what the future of photography might look like?
Well, I can answer that. I've just bought a Canon R5 camera, which is an extraordinary piece of kit. It's going to revolutionize photography. Because you don't really need to. It's almost a disadvantage to be a photographer to use it. It's all about programs. And of course, the problem with programs is that people become programmed. They become so predetermined, mechanistic.
Almost removed from the process.
Yeah, and that process is so important in photography. And that's, to me, mechanistic is like a total anathema. You know, the sinuous way I like to be as a person is reflected in my work. And that's going to reflect us all. To me, it's an anathema when art is mechanistic. There are some amazing Russian mechanistic artists, but not that many. So the Canon R5, and they're basically, it doesn't matter the make and model, it's a mirrorless camera. And it's got incredible resolution, autofocus, hocus pocus, the whole bit. And I'm very excited to use it, despite the warning, the caveat, because I know I'm so soaked in the process of making photographs, that's not going to alter. I've just got to learn to use it in a way, and it is startling. But here comes the warning. A friend of mine, David Tippling, perhaps the second best bird photographer in the world, give or take. And he got a cover of BBC World Gardeners World magazine and double page inside with the same photograph. He got paid £8. 12 years before that event, that would have been 900. You can't live on £8 on something that might happen twice in your life. So, you know, economics determine everything. Most photographers now don't make photographs. They run courses to young people or older people on how to become a photographer. And it's really important to state this, and I'm going to make myself very unpopular saying it. You can't teach people how to be a photographer. They've got to find that process themselves. You have a nice time in a hotel and la-di-da, but It's just the way that goes in, man.
There's no formula.
No, of course not.
No.
And that's the formula, and lack of it, all artists have always used all the time.
Mm.
They've changed their way of, and they do probably better than they did before, financially, but it's far removed from photography for me. Now, other people got different ideas. It's great, but I'm afraid I see things for what they are.
Did you experience any resistance when it came to developing film to the digital era?
Yeah, I was the guy, but this is always me, I'm afraid. I am never going digital.
No.
That's what I said, of course. So when it came, I embraced it.
Yeah.
Because it's like another revolution. It's
Yeah.
the Industrial Revolution. And, it was exciting. I made every mistake you could possibly make, and plus a few more.
Mm.
But that's all part of the process. But there's a problem. I've got 1 million unprocessed photographs.
Mm.
So perhaps, Simon, if you've got a free 4 lifetimes, you'd like to process those photographs for nothing for me. How do you feel about that?
I will create a darkroom today.
Yeah. So then you get the new toy.
Yeah.
And it's not a toy, it's a tool.
Yeah.
And it's even easier to make photographs.
Yeah.
So you triple in the effect. That's the process. There's only so much you can do. And however passionate you are, it's really important as an artist to have a square life in every level of society.
Yeah.
People are unhappy. They're not happy inside. And they're looking for some kind of illusion. And that leads into another side of my work, is my documentary work. I do quite a lot of that. I go in phases with my work. You know, I'd really like now to get back to doing some relaxing work in the landscape.
Yeah.
And because that's when I really come alive. That's perhaps my first love. So, but, you know, who knows?
I can ask a couple of kind of, I suppose it's consistent questions for me. I like to ask every guest who I have on some form of this question or other. What do you like and what don't you like about your own work?
Whoa, that's a huge question. It's a great question. What I do like about it, it's me.
Yeah.
Okay. What I don't like about it, never quite good enough. I think most artists would say that because they're real sticklers.
Yeah.
That's all I can say. Perhaps importantly, if we could now, is talk about my last book.
Of course, yeah.
That's kind of my most ambitious book of the 3. And it's about the subject of rewilding in Britain and Ireland. So I was frustrated all the time about the reality, the kind of rose-tinted spectacle Britain and Ireland that we're presented with, and the reality.
Yeah.
And the difficulty in creating real change. So when I did my first job in Oxford National Nature Reserve, and I was doing a master's degree in zoology on beetles, I discovered that there were beetles in the damp dune slats that were restricted to 2 or 3 feet in their distribution. Now that blew my mind, because what that told me is that every single variation of habitat is important for wildlife. Usually we don't even know it's there. We can't see it. It's tiny. But those are the things that matters. It's not so much the birds and the plants. They're just the top of the food chain, or the mammals, whatever it is. Yeah. It's the smaller things that determine everything. Yeah. They're at the bottom of the pyramid. So then at the back of the sand dunes, there was a freshwater marsh. Dr. Derek Thomas, who was a mathematician at Swansea University, was a passionate guy with birds. He was trapping and ringing reed warblers. He discovered that reed warblers came back to within a metre of their nest the previous year.
Really?
Now, whether at the time Derek or anyone else was aware of magnetic forces that birds use, we now know that's the case.
Yeah.
But what it tells you more than that is what the bird's journey is about. It knows exactly what it needs. So every single square metre of the landscape is important for something. That is rewilding. Now, people get scared about rewilding. Particularly the agricultural community have been bombarded with how they should be living, that that everyone's under pressure. We should be giving support to our farmers.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, some passionate conservationists have made farmers feel that they're doing everything wrong. They then become resistant to sensible change. But rewilding has got the possibility, because it's the way I interpret it and how we developed the book. We looked at individual authors, but in the end we went with 52 essays by different conservationists, from farmers to landscape ecologists to guitarists to poets, people involved in the whole community. And a lot of them disagreed with each other, and that's what we wanted. We wanted a book that reflected the complexity of the choices we were or could make. And it was great doing it. We worked on projects as diverse as NEP, rewilding project in Sussex, to a couple of women in the Cairngorms who never farmed before and bought 150 acres.
Is that what, I was going to ask you if you could, for the audience, simplify what rewilding means.
Right, well, there isn't a simple answer to a simple question. Rewilding means for me, to bring back an element of wild places to an already crowded island, crowded with people, with a diminished wildlife habitats. Yeah. Everything has been diminished. But the only way to do that is to involve people, because people is what makes the change. Yeah. So to me, rewilding means people, and it means becoming involved in in a small way, perhaps, it can be a window box in a high-rise flat in Hackney, or it can be Allerdale Estate bought with the sole purpose of bringing back megafauna, 26,000 acres. So it's everything in between those two places. And there isn't I think we get too hung up on what is right and what is wrong, what works and what doesn't. Yeah. When we do things, we don't monitor enough the effects of when we create change. That is the important thing, because that way you understand what and why we're changing things.
It's trying to consider the ability for things to adapt, adaptation being
very, very critical and really important to monitor those changes that are happening, because that's when understanding comes. For example, I went to NEP in 2018 and I was there for a week, and I was very, very moving. I'd gone to a place called Firming Country Park on my journey south. I'd never seen purple emperors. And the story that the people at NET wanted was the purple emperor. So Matthew Oates said, go and see some purple emperors. They're easier there. As it happened, it turned out to be the opposite. It was about 88 every day that week. Anyway, I went to Firmin and I got a glimpse of purple emperors. I thought, I'm never going to do this. It's going to be too tough. So anyway, the next day I went to NEP. And that afternoon I talked to the ecologist. That afternoon I met Matthew Oates. And for me, significantly, the greatest scientist I've ever met and worked with, which was Neil Hume. A real fantastic on ecology and particularly butterflies. So we did quite well. There were purple emperors all round us. And to give you some idea of the scale of the change at Knepp, what had happened there, they had discovered some years before, everyone thought the food plant for purple emperors was oak. They discovered that it was actually willow. And they could propagate the willow by bringing in Tamworth pigs, which rooted in the ground and meant the willow sprouted laterally and created more trees.
Wow.
Often these things are discovered by complete chance. So, the day before, they'd done a transect, and in one day, they discovered more purple emperors in one site than had ever been discovered anywhere in Europe in the day. By complete chance, they'd realised that, and that's where the monitoring side of it is so important.
Yeah.
So we did quite well. I photographed some nice pics and stuff. And then Matthew had to go. And I was feeling a bit desperate because I hadn't got the photo. Even though I had the whole week to go. So I looked at Neil and I kind of sensed a total free spirit, but in a very different form to myself. So I just looked him in the eye and said, "Do you like the Clash, Neil?" He said, "David, I saw them live 26 times." Big mate.
Yeah.
I had to admit, I only saw them twice, albeit on successive nights. But he was lovely, Neil.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about the butterflies. We started seeing them. We didn't get many pictures. It was about 7 o'clock at night. It was about 80 degrees. So we looked way up in the canopy, and there was a male purple emperor trying to mate with a female. After 45 minutes of this, Neil said, "She's not interested." So he said what she'll do, and the reason she's not interested, she hasn't released the chemical in the butterfly, the meconium, that prevents the sperm getting through to the eggs. Therefore, it's a mechanistic biological process that the female controls the whole population dynamic.
Yeah.
So I looked at him. I thought, well, I can't climb 60 feet quickly up an oak tree to get these pictures. So he said, what she'll do, David, is she'll fold her wing to get rid of the male's advances. She'll fold her wing and drop to the ground like a stone. That's exactly what she did.
Oh, wow.
It was incredible. When it happened, Neil ran to find out where she dropped. And he got there just after the butterfly. And we watched her for about 15 minutes in the grass.
Yeah.
And then he looked me in the eye and said, "David, I'm going to try something." So I said, "On the rose bush." There's a wild rose there. So he got it on his finger. And then he put on the bush. It was 8 o'clock at night. The light was extraordinary. I made 2,000 photographs.
Oh, wow.
So, and then a similar event I was in Neffin Beg, which is one of the biggest areas of peat bog in Europe, on the western fringes in County Mayo. And we'd had a girl, Helen Callaghan, the officer for the National Park, Susan Callaghan, really sorry, Susan. And I walked out on the peat bog and sat for about 2 hours, and it didn't change one iota. So I made a few pictures, didn't really get what I wanted. But that's the only time. I was going back to Britain the next day.
Yeah.
As we were walking off the bog, I put my foot down and almost stepped on a huge beetle.
Really?
And I made a series of photographs. There was a bit of jostle between Sue and me to get the photographs I wanted, and for her to get the ones I wanted. And of course, the Irish usually win in those situations. But I got what I wanted and was thrilled.
Yeah.
And then within 10 minutes of getting back to the visitor centre, she'd sent her images to her friend who identified it. That peatland specialist occurred in 4 places in Britain.
Really?
So, again, totally random.
Yeah.
And you're talking about a couple of 100,000 acres. So, a big area. And we'd found this, and that's the miracle of just being alive and being out there.
Can I ask about, it's a bit of an environmental question, but I was curious, a lot these days you hear of companies and very wealthy individuals talking about carbon offsets. And I've been hearing discussions about how the carbon offset is, it sounds nice, but when you plant trees, what you don't have is the fungal ecology that takes hundreds of years to develop. And we're very reliant upon that for the CO2.
Exactly. It's going back to life being very much more complex. The environment is ultimately the ultimate in complexity. I'm concerned about carbon offsets because it's linked to money usually, and it's a very convenient way of making us feel good. In theory, it's great.
Yeah.
You mentioned tree planting. For example, historically, most of our best bogs were planted with trees, which means that it's, in some cases, fatally damaged those peat bogs' ability to reduce the CO2 escaping and causing climate change.
Yeah.
What people are now doing, you never ever plant trees on peat bogs because you reduce their ability. They're the only hope we've got. And ironically, that's going to be my next book.
Oh, fantastic.
On something I worked for 35 years on peat bogs.
Yeah.
And when I was a conservationist in Chat Moss in Lancashire, we worked with Fisons who had the license to protect these places and then exploit them for peat. And we struck a deal, and that's what controls the amount of CO2 that's turned to the atmosphere. So what conservationists are now doing is actually blocking all the ditches that Fisons neatly created to drain them and return them to re-wet them, re-wild them, if you like. The word almost doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We've learned a lot about peat bog ecology. We need to learn a lot more. And actually, many of them have been burned historically badly. That it's awful way of managing peat bogs. Many of our uplands are burnt for grouse moors. That's fatal for our CO2.
Yeah.
For a sport, I love fishing.
Yeah.
As I explained in my first blog, that's how I became me, through fishing. And we all engage in the landscape. There shouldn't be criticism of that. But I think we've got to make hard decisions now about how important carbon is to retain it in the ground.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we're floating to Mars.
Yeah. This is a question I ask every guest that I have without fail. And it is relevant for you because you're a photographer, and it's the same for artists and filmmakers and anyone who's out there to try and kind of tell a story or convey a message or share an appreciation. And that is, what is the most beautiful thing you've seen today?
The sun coming up.
Did you see the sunrise? Did you? Yeah. Oh, fantastic. How beautiful.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
And I saw it on the way to going swimming.
Yeah.
And that's how I keep myself fit, healthy.
Sunrise. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being a guest. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'll be sure to feature you again on the channel because this is a fascinating conversation. And it's ongoing, as you well know. We've got so much we could talk about, but we've covered a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. That's it. Thanks for
It's a wrap.
Okay, now that is the last episode done. Now in this, I'm going to just quickly talk to you for a second before I leave with some updates. I spoke recently in, it was either in a video or a podcast from last week about how I'm going to be uploading things which are kind of like vlogs. I don't think I'm going to be doing the vlog style thing yet until it is a vlog, which basically just means it's going to be basically a travel video. And I've looked at the footage and it's not quite comprehensive enough. You start to understand in the edit whether you've got enough or whether you haven't. And I'm going to try and make up the difference. But because it's from a while ago, I've got two of these travel vlog like videos that I've been editing. One is to Oriel Mosting, and that's some really nice footage, but it's not long. And then the other one is to Llanberis recently, where I went and visited a friend and looked around. And again, there's not loads of footage, but I did use a bit of footage from my new camera, the Sony, what is it, ZV-E10. Is that what it is? It says it somewhere on here. Yeah, ZV-E10. Lovely little camera. So I did use this when I was there in Llanberis, you know. And that one's a bit more festive. So I'm going to upload the Oriel Mosting video first, and then the Llanberis video more towards Christmas, which is, you know, not far away. So they will be uploaded soon. I'm going to try and do a bit of artwork for each of them, because I still want this to be an art channel and not turn it into a travel vlog channel. So I'm going to try to keep it basically on message still. But aside from that, I've got one about greeting cards, you know, kind of like Christmas cards, birthday cards. I'm editing that one, so that might come out first as well. Either way, those 3 videos I've got planned before Christmas, and there's only something like 11 or 10 days until Christmas now. So that's going to be it for 2022 of the Good Values podcast. I'll put up a clip from this episode on Tuesday next week, and then that'll be it. I'm going to retitle all of them to seasons. I'm thinking about redoing all the thumbnails and not just doing the plain card for the thumbnail now, because I don't think that that's really getting enough views. I think more people would look at the podcast if they could see the guest. You know, like how most podcasts have pictures of the people's faces, and I want to try and get as many views as possible because I really like the artists, and I'd like them to have more exposure to the audience that I, you know, can tap into if I can. So that's the plan. I'm going to put some work and get all that done before Christmas. I'm going to work on an intro sequence, or a, what do you call it? I think it's an intro for your channel. You know, like how you have a video where you welcome people to your channel. I'm going to have that done for next year. So I might do that between Christmas and New Year. And I've got some ideas about what I'm going to use, but that'll take some editing. And then what else? I was trying to think of something else. I think I'm going to redo certain thumbnails. So if there's certain videos that pop up in your feed and you've already watched it, forgive me, it's because I'm redoing some thumbnails, but look at the date of the upload, because if it's new, I still want you to check it out. Anyway, I'm rambling on. Thank you very much for watching the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please support David on the links that I will leave in the description below. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, share this with anyone who you think might enjoy it, friends and family. I really appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next episode next year.